So clearly, if we're talking about contracts, it makes sense for us to talk about smart contracts, right? We've been focusing so much on artificial intelligence and big data. It's really time for us to do a deeper dive into a blockchain technology, and smart contracts are clearly, from my point of view anyway, one of the most interesting applications of that technology. So before we go any further, let's actually answer the question, what is a smart contract? So it's essentially a self-executing program or piece of software, which is loosely referred to as a contract on the basis that the terms of the agreement are directly written into the code. Smart contracts exist across a distributed, decentralized blockchain network, and effectively they're little pieces of code which allow for actions to be carried out amongst disparate and anonymous parties without the need for a central authority, a legal system, or any kind of external enforcement mechanism. Just like a traditional contract, a smart contract defines the rules and penalties around an agreement, who's going to do what and what the consequences are if it's not done. But it also automatically enforces those obligations. So it's quite a different way of undertaking business. So let's break down how they work. So they use blockchain technology, and so blockchain technology, and by extension smart contract applications, offer a level of transparency and verification protocol that ensures that there's no opportunity for hackers or thieves to make unnoticed changes. The system doesn't allow for changes to old entries. That's what immutability is all about. So since no one entity controls the blockchain, in theory, everybody can trust it. It's trust nobody and trust the process in order to get the benefits of blockchain. There are many potential applications across a range of different industries because smart contracts are decentralized, transparent, and self-executing in nature. They can facilitate payments and remittances without intermediaries. They streamline securities trading and settlement processes. They can automate the claims processes in insurance, and they could even ensure secure, transparent, and tamper-proof voting systems. In the context of this course, understanding smart contracts is a really important way of understanding how the blockchain works, and a really great opportunity to think about how these contracts sit under the law of contract. Smart contracts represent or could represent a significant shift in the way that business transactions might be conducted. We're starting to see them now, and the expectation is we'll see more of them in the future. But of course, because they're new, they bring new legal issues and new legal considerations for us to think about. So as you work through the Canvas material, you'll have some opportunities to sort of play with some hypothetical case studies and to think about how the issues play together. One of the best ways to explain how smart contracts work is to use the vending machine analogy. And you'll see there's a video on Canvas where Sergey Britkin, I think I've said his name incorrectly, but he's one of the founders of Ethereum and Ether, which is the blockchain that was built essentially for smart contracting. He uses the vending machine analogy, which originally was used by Nick Szabo, who came up with the idea of smart contracts well before we ever saw a blockchain as a methodology for delivering them. And one of the points that he makes, and I think this is really important, is that even though they're called smart contracts, they're neither particularly smart nor are they necessarily contracts. So don't let the language fool you too much. So think about a vending machine. If you insert your money into a machine and you press the button corresponding to a particular chocolate bar, the machine recognizes that the money's gone in and dispenses the chocolate bar. No money, no chocolate bar. You put in the money and you don't get a chocolate bar, then the machine itself is faulty. So think about the vending machine as being the smart contract, and the money you put in is the input or the trigger that starts the process. The button you press corresponds with the conditions of the contract being met, and the chocolate bar is the output or the execution of the contract itself. So why or how is this like a smart contract? It works on a predefined set of rules. So just like a vending machine is programmed to deliver a specific snack when the right amount of money is inserted and the right button is pushed, a smart contract is programmed to automatically execute certain actions when predefined conditions are met. So for example, a smart contract might release payment when a service is completed, or pay an insurance claim when a certain amount of damage is detected. Secondly, they're self-executing. Once the conditions are satisfied, so like inserting the correct amount of money and selecting a product with a vending machine, the smart contract will perform the action without needing any further intervention, just the same as a vending machine would. There's no need for a shopkeeper, a middleman to oversee the transaction. It just all flows automatically. Thirdly, there's no requirement for trust here. You don't need to trust the vending machine to deliver a chocolate bar. You know it's going to do it because it's been programmed to do exactly that when the right inputs are provided. Similarly, with a smart contract, you don't need to trust a third party to enforce the contract. It's programmed to execute as soon as the conditions are met. The fourth thing that's relevant here is transparency and predictability. You know exactly what's going to happen when you insert money into a vending machine. The process is transparent, it's predictable. Similarly, smart contracts are transparent, everyone can see the code, and predictable. They execute exactly as coded. Also, because they're code, they execute exactly as coded, we actually don't have the risk that we have with a mechanical device like a smart device here or a vending machine, that things get stuck or there's kind of, some sort of electronic issue that stops that vending machine from working, because by its very nature, sitting on a blockchain, it's distributed. And so we've got many points of transparency and predictability that we can draw on. So we could use this in the real world in a range of different ways. So let's think about an example, say a rental agreement. So the condition could be if the tenant pays the rent by the due date, that's the input. The smart contract allows access to the rental property, the output. So the key or the door release is programmed to respond when the rent has been paid. The execution, the smart contract automatically unlocks a door when payment's received without requiring a landlord to manually verify payment and hand over the key. So both a smart contract, like a vending machine, both of them operate on an if this, then that principle. They're automated systems that execute specific actions based on predefined conditions. They don't need human intervention. They don't need a trusted third party. So the analogy is really useful, but now with the power of the blockchain, we can do much more complex things with smart contracts than I suspect that Nick Szabo ever contemplated when he came up with the idea back in 1997. So how are smart contracts similar to or different from traditional contracts? So let's start with the similarities. Clearly, both involve agreements to an extent. Both traditional contracts and smart contracts are agreements between parties. They're established to create mutual obligations or promises, and they typically involve the exchange of goods, services, or other forms of value. Secondly, both require certain elements to be valid. For a contract to be valid under Australian law, it needs to have offer or acceptance, together creating agreement, intention to create legal relationship, consideration, and certainty. Similarly, a smart contract needs to have a clear agreement between the parties, who's going to do what, what's going to happen, what the triggers are, when it's going to happen, and they need very well-defined terms to execute the contract. It's essentially the certainty is the key thing. The actual language in the contract becomes the language in the code. Now, clearly, both of these can also be legally enforceable. Traditional contracts are enforceable under law, and smart contracts can also be legally enforceable if they meet all of the requirements of a valid contract under Australian law. Now, not all smart contracts will be valid contracts under Australian law, but many will be. Also, let's talk about the differences. So differences go to the nature of the contract or the physical documentation itself, the nature of the form of the agreement. Traditional contracts they can be verbal, as you know, but they're typically written in natural language. Smart contracts, on the other hand, are written in computer code. So a smart contract can be executed automatically by a computer program or a decentralized platform like a blockchain once the conditions have been met. Secondly, automation and self-execution. Smart contracts are designed to be self-executing and self-enforcing. That means they automatically execute the terms of the agreement without the need for human intervention. Traditional contracts, on the other hand, usually require manual enforcement, and disputes are resolved through legal channels, through arbitration, through mediation, by bringing in a trusted third party, effectively, to adjudicate or assist with the resolution of the dispute. The third thing is immutability and transparency. Smart contracts on a blockchain are generally immutable, meaning that once they're deployed, they can be easily altered or tampered with. They cannot be easily altered or tampered with. This results in a high level of security and transparency for the parties involved. Traditional contracts, however, can be more susceptible to fraud, forgery, or misinterpretation. Particularly when they're oral in nature, there can be significant disagreements between the parties as to what was actually agreed and what the content of the contract was. Also, many disputes involve significant review of the terms of the contract and arguments about the intention behind the wording, where at the end of the day, with computer code, which can be tested before the contract is put into place, it either delivers or it doesn't deliver. There is only one ultimate interpretation of what it is that the code executes. The fourth issue is flexibility in formation. Traditional contracts under Australian law can be oral, written, or a combination of the two. Smart contracts always need to be digital, and they're written in code at the end of the day. Now, there are many different types of platforms they can be written on. Ethereum is one of the oldest and probably the most respected, but there are many blockchain platforms that have the capacity to incorporate smart contracts, including the original Bitcoin itself. Although not as sophisticated as Ethereum, it can still do it. The fifth thing I want to talk about is interpretation and ambiguity, which I've touched on a little bit, but traditional contracts are in natural language, so they can be subject to interpretation, and this can lead to disputes and litigation. Smart contracts, on the other hand, are written in code, which by its nature is precise, less prone to misinterpretation or ambiguity, and can be tested before the contract is formed. It also means, of course, that errors or vulnerabilities in the code could result in unintended consequences. And as we move on and we look at DAOs, which ultimately require smart contracts to execute, we'll see where issues have arisen in this context. So over time, as we see smart contracts being used more and more, it's likely that the law is going to need to adapt to address some of these unique challenges and also to take advantages of the opportunities that are presented. I guess this slide here is my kind of high-level overview of some of the similarities and differences, and I thought I would just make that available to you so you can just have a look at you can compare them, because this could be a handy sort of thinking tool as you're addressing risks that come up in your next assignment if it involves smart contracts in any way. On that note, questions, concerns, frustrations, compliments, you know where to find me. We will continue on talking about the Australian consumer law and in particular unfair contract terms. And we'll also talk a little bit about the ways that contracts can help us allocate risks going forward. Cheers.